The Plumber and the Storm. The wrench slipped from Maya's oil-stained fingers and clattered against the ceramic sink basin. At the exact moment, lightning split the Seattle sky in two. She had been under that kitchen sink for 40 minutes, her body folded into an uncomfortable angle, her mind replaying the argument she'd had with her father that morning about her choices, her life, her refusal to be anything other than exactly who she was. The leak had seemed like a simple fix when she arrived at the old Victorian house on Maple Street, but nothing in Maya's life had been simple for a very long time. She was 32 years old, running her late uncle's plumbing business, wearing steel-toed boots that her mother said made her look too masculine, and carrying a heart that had learned to protect itself behind layers of sarcasm and solitude. When she finally backed out from under the sink and sat up, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, she looked up to find a woman standing in the doorway with 2 cups of tea, and something in Maya's carefully constructed walls began to crack. Her name was Dr. Eleanor Chen, and she had moved into the Victorian 3 months earlier after her divorce from a prominent surgeon had become Seattle's medical community's favorite piece of gossip. Eleanor was 41, with silver threading through her black hair that she refused to dye, wearing reading glasses that hung from a delicate chain around her neck, and carrying herself with the kind of exhausted grace that comes from years of maintaining appearances while dying inside. She had called Maya's company because the kitchen sink had been leaking for weeks, and her ex-husband, who had handled all such matters during their 15-year marriage, was no longer someone she could call for anything, especially not for help. Eleanor set the teacups on the counter with hands that trembled slightly, and when Maya stood up, their eyes met for a moment that lasted far longer than either of them intended. There was recognition there, not of faces but of something deeper, the way 2 people who have both learned to hide their true selves can sometimes see through each other's disguises without meaning to. Maya fixed the leak within another 20 minutes, but the storm outside had grown vicious, turning the October afternoon into premature darkness, rain hammering against the windows with a fury that made leaving seem both impossible and foolish. Eleanor insisted she stay until the worst passed, and Maya, who would normally have braved any weather to escape the discomfort of small talk with clients, found herself accepting. They sat at Eleanor's kitchen table, 2 women who had spent most of their adult lives performing versions of themselves that others could accept, drinking tea that grew cold as they talked. Eleanor spoke about her marriage to a man she had respected but never truly loved, about the daughter who was away at college and barely called anymore, about the medical practice she had built while suffocating under the weight of expectations that had nothing to do with her own desires. Maya talked about growing up in a religious household where her father was a pastor and her identity was something shameful to be prayed away, about taking over her uncle's business after he died, about the loneliness of being visibly yourself in a world that still preferred you invisible. The conversation deepened as the storm raged, and somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd cup of tea, Eleanor's hand reached across the table and rested on top of Maya's, just for a moment, just long enough for both of them to feel the electric current of connection that neither had expected to find again. Maya pulled her hand back instinctively, her defenses rising, but Eleanor's eyes held something that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. It was vulnerability, raw and unguarded, the look of someone who had finally stopped pretending and found it both terrifying and liberating. Maya recognized it because she saw the same thing in her own mirror every morning, the face of someone who had chosen authenticity over acceptance and paid the price in isolation. When Eleanor whispered that she had known something was missing in her marriage, but had spent 15 years convincing herself that contentment was enough, Maya understood completely. When Maya admitted that she had stopped believing anyone would ever see past her armor, Eleanor reached across the table again, and this time Maya didn't pull away. What began that stormy afternoon became something neither of them had the language to describe at first. Maya started finding reasons to drive past the Victorian house, to check on previous work, to ensure everything was still functioning properly. Eleanor began discovering new things that needed fixing, small problems that probably didn't require a professional but gave Her an excuse to hear Maya's voice on the phone, to see her truck pull into the driveway, to feel less alone in the big house that had become her refuge and her prison. Their conversations stretched longer, moving from the kitchen to the living room, from afternoon tea to evening wine, from careful politeness to genuine laughter that surprised them both. Maya learned that Eleanor played piano beautifully, but hadn't touched the keys in years, because her ex-husband had found it pretentious. Eleanor discovered that Maya wrote poetry in notebooks she kept hidden in her truck, words about longing and belonging that she had never shared with anyone. They circled each other like two frightened animals, drawn together by recognition and repelled by fear, knowing that what was growing between them was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with them and everything to do with the world they lived in. The first time they kissed was not cinematic or planned. It happened on a Tuesday evening when Maya had stayed past dinner to help Eleanor hang new curtains in the study. And Eleanor had made a joke about being hopeless with tools, and Maya had laughed and said something about being hopeless with feelings. And suddenly the air between them was charged with all the things they hadn't said. Eleanor stepped closer. Close enough that Maya could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. Close enough to count the freckles on her nose that makeup usually covered. Close enough to feel dangerous. Maya's hands were shaking when she reached up to touch Eleanor's face, her calloused fingertips rough against smooth skin, and when their lips finally met, it felt like coming home to a place neither of them had known existed. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question being asked and answered. But then Eleanor's hands were in Maya's hair, and Maya's arms were around Eleanor's waist, and they were both crying without knowing exactly why, except that it felt like every lonely year, every compromise, every piece of themselves they had hidden away was finally being seen and held and cherished. But love that blooms in secret gardens still faces the frost of the outside world. Maya's family discovered the relationship when her sister saw them holding hands at a coffee shop across town, somewhere they thought they were safe from recognition. Her father called it an abomination from the pulpit the following Sunday without naming names, but everyone in their small religious community knew who he meant. Her mother left voicemails begging Maya to seek counseling, to pray harder, to stop choosing sin over family. Maya had been through this before, had already been rejected once for being herself, but this time felt different, because this time she had something real to lose beyond abstract acceptance. Eleanor's ex-husband heard rumors and threatened to use the information in custody negotiations, painting Eleanor as an unfit mother going through a moral crisis. Her daughter called from college, angry and confused, asking why her mother was destroying their family's reputation, why she couldn't just be normal. Eleanor's medical practice saw patients canceling appointments, heard whispers in hospital corridors, felt the weight of judgment from colleagues who had once respected her. The pressure built like storm clouds gathering, dark and heavy and inevitable. Maya suggested they step back, give each other space, let the attention die down. Eleanor agreed through tears that maybe it was too much, too fast, too complicated. They stopped seeing each other for 3 weeks that felt like 3 years. Both of them going through the motions of their separate lives while feeling like essential parts of themselves had been amputated. Maya threw herself into work, taking jobs she didn't need, staying busy until exhaustion made thinking impossible. Eleanor volunteered for extra shifts at the hospital, filled her calendar with obligations that left no room for feeling. But loneliness has a way of making everything else seem hollow, and both of them discovered that safety without joy was just another kind of dying. Maya realized that she had spent her whole life trying to earn love by being smaller, quieter, less herself, and for once, she had found someone who loved her not despite who she was, but because of it. Eleanor understood that she had already lost 15 years to fear and expectation, and she didn't have another 15 to waste pretending that loving Maya wasn't the most honest thing she had ever done. They found their way back to each other on a rainy November evening that mirrored the storm that had brought them together. Maya showed up at the Victorian house without calling first, her heart hammering, her hands full of the wildflowers Eleanor had once mentioned loving. Eleanor opened the door looking exhausted and beautiful and surprised, and before either of them could overthink it, they were in each other's arms again, holding on like drowning people who had finally found shore. This time they made different promises. They wouldn't hide, but they wouldn't perform their relationship for others' approval either. They would protect their love by living it authentically. by creating a life that belonged to them and not to anyone else's expectations. Maya introduced Eleanor to her chosen family, the friends who had stood by her through every rejection. Eleanor stood up to her ex-husband with a lawyer and a spine made of steel. Refusing to be intimidated into hiding, they weathered the judgment together, finding strength in each other that neither possessed alone, learning that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision that something matters more than being afraid. The video you're watching isn't just about a plumber and a doctor falling in love during a storm. It's about two women who had the audacity to choose themselves, to choose each other, to build something real in a world that often prefers beautiful lies to difficult truths. If this story has touched something in your heart, if you've ever felt like you had to hide parts of yourself to be accepted, if you believe in love that's brave enough to be honest, then please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that. They're not alone. Stories like Maya and Eleanor's need to be told because somewhere out there, someone is sitting under a kitchen sink or in a big empty house, wondering if choosing authenticity means choosing loneliness. And they need to know that it doesn't. Maya and Eleanor still live in the Victorian house on Maple Street. Maya's truck is parked in the driveway most nights, her tools neatly organized in the garage next to Eleanor's medical textbooks. Eleanor plays piano again, filling the house with music that Maya says sounds like coming home. They have dinner with Eleanor's daughter when she visits, and the conversations are sometimes still awkward. But they're healing in the way that truth heals, slowly and with scars, but with the possibility of real reconciliation. Maya's parents haven't come around yet, and maybe they never will. But Maya has learned that you cannot shrink yourself, small enough to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold your whole self. They have hard days when the judgment feels heavy, when they wonder if fighting this battle is worth the cost. But then they look at each other, across the kitchen table where it all began, and remember that some things are worth fighting for. Before we reach the ending, I want to ask you something special. In the comments below, tell me about a moment when someone saw the real you and loved you anyway, or share what this story made you feel. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. The truth about forbidden love is that it's only forbidden by people who have forgotten what it feels like to be fully alive. Maya and Eleanor didn't find each other despite the storm, but because of it. Because sometimes it takes darkness and thunder to reveal what's been there all along, waiting to be brave enough to exist. They're not perfect and their love isn't always easy, but it's real in ways that their previous lives never were. And every time it rains now, they sit together by the window and remember that afternoon when a broken sink brought them together and they both found the courage to stop leaking their truth into hidden spaces and let it flow freely instead. That's the kind of love worth remembering, the kind worth fighting for, the kind that changes everything. And it started with a plumber, a storm, and two people who finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world.